Picture this. Moscow, December 25th, 1991. Mikhail Gorbachev sits alone in his Kremlin office, fountain pen hovering over his resignation letter as Soviet premier. Through his window, the red flag with hammer and sickle is being lowered for the final time. But here's what the history books won't tell you. Spread across his desk are financial documents showing the USSR's foreign debt has exploded to $96. $6 billion to $96. 6 years earlier, when Gorbachev took power, Soviet planners made a single catastrophic bet. They would match Ronald Reagan's military build-up dollar for dollar. The forensic record shows they spent themselves into the ground trying. Here's what keeps me up at night about the Soviet collapse. Everyone focuses on communism versus capitalism, on political freedom, on the Berlin Wall falling. But the autopsy is financial. The USSR didn't collapse because of ideology. It collapsed because central planners made the same mathematical error that killed the Ottoman Empire in 1876, Weimar Germany in 1923, and Argentina in 2001. They borrowed against future revenue streams that never materialized. They leveraged their entire economy on a single commodity price that crashed, and they spent 25% of GDP on defense, while their primary revenue source, oil exports, lost 71% of its value in 6 years. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how the Soviet Union spent itself to death. Not through communist economics. Through basic financial engineering failure. The forensic evidence is specific, documented, and more than a little terrifying when you see the same pattern playing out today. Number 1. The Leverage Trap, 1985-1987. When Mikhail Gorbachev assumed power in March 1985, he inherited a Soviet foreign debt of $31. $4 billion. $4 billion. Not catastrophic for a superpower. But here's the kicker. Soviet planners had structured their entire economy around oil export revenues trading at $35 per barrel. In 1986, oil prices collapsed to $10 per barrel. The USSR lost 60% of its hard currency income overnight. The forensic record from Gazbank, the Soviet central bank, shows that by December 1985, Soviet leadership faced a choice: cut military spending and admit defeat in the arms race, or borrow Western currency to maintain defense expenditures. They chose debt. Between 1985 and 1987, Soviet foreign borrowing increased by 156%. They were financing current military spending with loans denominated in dollars and Deutschmarks, while their revenue came from rubles and oil sales. Same pattern, different century. The Ottoman Empire made identical calculations in 1854. Sultan Abdülmecid I borrowed £3 million from British banks to finance the Crimean War, expecting Ottoman cotton exports to service the debt. When cotton prices collapsed in 1873, the Ottomans defaulted on foreign debt totaling £200 million, roughly 50% of their GDP. The empire never recovered financial sovereignty. The documented parallel is precise. Both empires leveraged their entire fiscal structure on maintaining military parity with rivals, while depending on volatile commodity exports. Both assumed export prices would remain stable. Both were wrong. Number 2. The Defense Spending Death Spiral, 1982-1989. Here's what blows people's minds about the arms race mathematics. In 1982, the United States was spending 6.2% of GDP on defense. The Soviet Union was spending 8% of GDP. When Reagan launched the Strategic Defense Initiative in 1983, Soviet planners calculated they needed to match American military technology spending percentage for percentage. By 1985, Soviet defense spending reached 25% of GDP. The forensic accounting from declassified Politburo minutes shows the specific decision point. On November 12, 1985, Defense Minister Sergei Sokolov presented Gorbachev with a choice: match Reagan's $1.7 trillion military modernization program over 6 years, or concede technological defeat. The Soviets chose to match it. They were committing $283 billion in foreign currency, money they didn't have, to a spending race with an economy twice their size. Weimar Germany executed the identical error in 1922. Chancellor Joseph Wirth's government attempted to simultaneously pay World War I reparations of 132 billion gold marks While rebuilding German military capacity, they financed both through currency printing and foreign borrowing. The Reichsbank's money supply increased 1,400% between January 1922 and November 1923. The results? Hyperinflation, political collapse, and the end of the Weimar Republic. Both the USSR and Weimar Germany tried to finance military spending beyond their productive capacity. Both used external borrowing to bridge the gap. Both discovered that borrowed money cannot create real productive capacity. It only delays the accounting. Number 3. The Commodity Revenue Collapse, 1986-1989. Not theory, not speculation, historical fact. In 1980, Soviet oil exports generated $8 billion in hard currency. This represented 78% of Soviet foreign exchange earnings. Oil was trading at $35.69 per barrel in January 1980. By March 1986, oil had collapsed to $10.42 per barrel. Soviet hard currency revenues fell from $8 billion to $6 billion, a 71% collapse in their primary revenue source. The forensic record from Soviet trade statistics shows the mathematics of fiscal death. Between 1986 and 1989, the USSR needed $127 billion in foreign currency to service existing debt, purchase Western technology, and maintain food imports. Their oil revenues generated only $67 billion over the same period. The gap, $60 billion. They borrowed the difference. Venezuela followed the identical trajectory between 2012 and 2018. Under Hugo Chavez and Nicolás Maduro, Venezuelan governments borrowed $150 billion against future oil revenues, while oil traded above $100 per barrel. When oil collapsed to $26 per barrel in 2016, Venezuela's foreign currency revenues fell by 68%. They defaulted on $65 billion in foreign debt by 2017. The country lost access to international credit markets and experienced hyperinflation reaching 1,300,000% by 2018. Same pattern, same stages, same outcome. Commodity-dependent economies that borrow against future export revenues collapse when commodity prices fall below debt service requirements. The mathematics are unforgiving. Number 4. The Foreign Currency Death Trap, 1988 to 1991. Here's the revelation that changes everything about Soviet collapse. By 1988, 67% of Soviet foreign debt was denominated in hard currencies, dollars, Deutschmarks, and yen. But 89% of Soviet economic activity generated rubles. They had created a currency mismatch that required constant hard currency inflows to avoid default. Yegor Gaidar, who later became Boris Yeltsin's acting prime minister, documented the specific mechanism of fiscal death in his economic analysis of Soviet collapse. Between 1988 and 1991, the USSR needed $34 billion annually in hard currency just to service existing foreign debt. Their maximum possible hard currency generation, even with oil at $20 per barrel, was $28 billion annually. They were structurally insolvent. Argentina engineered the identical trap between 1991 and 2001. Under President Carlos Menem, Argentina borrowed $144 billion in dollar-denominated debt while pegging the peso 112 the dollar. When export revenues fell and capital inflows stopped in 2001, Argentina couldn't generate enough dollars to service dollar debt. They defaulted on $82 billion, the largest sovereign default in history at that time. The forensic pattern is documented across 3 centuries: Turkey in 1876, Germany in 1923, Argentina in 2001, Venezuela in 2017. Every empire or nation that borrows in foreign currency while earning in domestic currency eventually faces the same mathematical impossibility, generating enough foreign currency to service foreign debt when export revenues collapse. If you're realizing that everything you thought you knew about the Soviet collapse is wrong, hit that subscribe button. This channel is Financial Forensics. We dissect the decisions that destroyed empires, bankrupted nations, and killed corporations. I perform autopsies on dead economies so you can recognize the patterns before they repeat. It's free. Number 5. The Final Borrowing Binge, 1989 to 1991. Stay with me on this because the endgame mathematics are brutal. Between January 1989 and December 1991, Soviet foreign debt increased from $59.8 billion to $96. $6 billion, a 61% increase in just 3 years. They were borrowing $3 billion annually, not to invest in productive capacity, but to service existing debt and maintain basic imports. The documented record from then Bank, the Soviet Foreign Trade Bank, shows the specific breakdown. Of the $36, $8 billion borrowed between 1989 and 1991, $19, $2 billion went to debt service payments, $11, $4 billion financed food imports, and $6, $2 billion purchased Western technology that never became operational due to the collapse. 0% went to productive investment that could generate future foreign currency. This is Ponzi scheme mathematics. New borrowing to pay old debts while the underlying revenue source continues declining. The Ottoman Empire executed the identical endgame between 1873 to 1876. External debt increased from £32 million to £200 million, while cotton export revenues fell 40%. By October 1876, the Ottoman government was using 80% of total revenues just to service foreign debt. The empire declared bankruptcy and lost financial sovereignty to European creditors for the next 45 years. Number 6. The systemic breakdown. December 1991. Here's what the forensic record shows about the final 30 days. On December 1, 1991, Soviet foreign reserves totaled $240 million. Foreign debt service payments due in December, $201 billion. The mathematics of empire death. They owed 9 times more than they possessed in liquid assets. But here's the kicker that proves financial engineering killed the USSR. On December 8, 1991, Boris Yeltsin, Leonid Kravchuk, and Stanislav Shushkevich signed the Belavasha Accords, officially dissolving the Soviet Union. The forensic evidence shows this wasn't a political decision. It was a bankruptcy proceeding. The USSR could no longer service its external debt obligations. The choice was dissolution or default. Weimar Germany faced the identical endpoint in November 1923. The German government owed 132 billion gold marks in reparations, while possessing foreign reserves of 0.3 billion gold marks. Chancellor Gustav Stresemann declared the end of passive resistance to French occupation because Germany could no longer finance government operations. The Weimar Republic effectively ended, replaced by a new currency system managed by foreign creditors. The mechanism doesn't change. Only the names do. Empires that leverage their fiscal structure beyond productive capacity face identical endpoints: dissolution, default, or foreign financial control. So where are we seeing these signs right now? The forensic pattern from Soviet collapse provides specific metrics for recognizing fiscal terminal illness in real time. First metric: foreign debt growing faster than export revenues. The USSR's foreign debt increased 208% between 1985 to 1991, while export revenues fell 34%. Currently, Turkey's foreign debt has increased 340% since 2008, while export revenues increased only 67%. Turkey owes $438 billion in foreign currency, while generating $180 billion annually in export revenues. Second metric: military spending exceeding 20% of government expenditure while dependent on volatile commodity exports. The USSR spent 25% of GDP on defense, while 78% of export revenues came from oil. Currently, Russia spends 7% of GDP on defense, while 49% of government revenues depend on oil and gas exports priced in dollars. Third metric: debt service consuming more than 15% of export revenues. Soviet debt service reached 23% of export revenues by 1990. Argentina's debt service currently consumes 28% of export revenues. Pakistan's debt service takes 31% of export revenues. The documented record from 1876, 1923, 1991, 2001, and 2017 provides the forensic framework. The warning signs are mathematical, not political. The forensic record from Soviet economic collapse gives you 4 specific protocols. Protocol 1. Never borrow in foreign currency while earning in domestic currency unless foreign currency revenues exceed debt service by 300%. The USSR violated this principle and lost sovereignty. Protocol 2. Military spending above 15% of GDP indicates fiscal terminal illness when combined with single commodity export dependence. The mathematics are historically unforgiving. Protocol 3. When debt service exceeds 20% of export revenues, the empire enters systemic breakdown regardless of political system. This threshold appears in Ottoman, German, Soviet, Argentine, and Venezuelan collapses. Protocol 4. Foreign reserves below 6 months of debt service payments indicate imminent default or dissolution. Every documented collapse shows the same mathematical endpoint. Picture this. Moscow, December 25, 1991. Mikhail Gorbachev signs the death certificate of a 69-year empire. But the cause of death isn't ideology, isn't politics, isn't the Cold War. The autopsy is complete. Death by financial engineering failure. The Soviet Union spent itself into mathematical impossibility, borrowed against revenues that never materialized, and discovered that empires cannot print foreign currency. The question isn't whether you've heard of the Soviet collapse. The question is whether you've read the actual autopsy, and whether you can recognize the same symptoms when they appear again. Subscribe if you want the forensic evidence that textbooks won't show you. What patterns are you seeing right now that remind you of 1991? Drop your analysis in the comments.